Hi, it's Karen, the Weekend Craftaholic, and today we're going to be making some quick and easy heat packs. So I've got this little basket filled with fat quarters, and these are perfect for little craft projects as well. So great size, you can get quite a few little projects out of these. So we're just going to grab one of these. I think we'll go for this one with a little owl on, and you can see you get a pretty good size. So first of all, start by ironing your fabric and make sure you get those creases out. The other good thing this project's good for is getting rid of some of your scraps. So if you don't want to use a fat quarter, just have a look what you've got in your little stash of leftover. Like this one, for example, would be great. So a great way to do a bit of scrap busting. So to make your circles, I would just find an object with the round shape, and this is just a little bowl, and just measure it against your hand and think how big you want it, because if you're making it for a child compared to a man, you'd obviously need different size circles. Now if you do have a big shot machine, if you are a paper crafter like I am, you can also use these dies. These are meant for paper, but if you do them one layer at a time, it works just fine. So these are some that I made with the paper dies, and you see it's just quilting cotton. They do fabric dies. This is the only one I've got is this square one for quilting, and they do all kinds of shapes. These do about 8 layers at once, but obviously we're just doing a one-off craft project, so it's a big investment unless you are a quilter. But if you do know someone that may have this lying around and you're not too confident in cutting out straight lines or circles because you are a beginner, then this is another alternative for you. So I'm going to quickly show you the two methods before I get on to cutting this. Shop machine. I'm only going to spend a few minutes just showing you this. It really is, I guess, for paper crafts, and if we're just going to use the normal paper die, so if you've got any of these, I'll know someone, and let me just get one out. I'll just use this size because this is perfect size for my hand. And which one is this? So that's the kind of just short of 4 by 4 inch, and I've just got a piece of scrap fabric here, as you can see. And I'm just going to cut it down a little to make sure it fits in the sides of the machine. Now this, as I say, it's good if you want to get a child learning how to sew. Maybe you've got a sewing machine for your paper crafts and you don't really sew and you just want to try a little small project. This is a great one to start off with. So if you do have a big shot, you'll know you try and get all of the cutting on one side so as not to ruin your blade. So I'm going to have that face down on that side. I've got my platform on number 2. And I'm going to put my top on, and then I'm just going to feed it through. Okay. And you can see that it's cut that out. Now there is a few little tiny bits that it's missed, but I'm not too worried about that because I am terrible at cutting circles, so I would rather just cut these little threads off. It's a lot quicker. Now also bear in mind when you're deciding the shape of your heat pad that you've also got to be able to sew in this direction, and sewing in circles and on curves can be a challenge for a beginner. You've got to go very slow, and it again depends if you're going to sew it or serge it on an overlocker. So that's an example of one with the thin dies, the thin metal dies. Let me show you how amazing these fabric dies are. So as I said, you can do it on about 8 layers of fabric. So I'm just going to fold it over a few times. This is a 4-inch one, so I don't really want to make a heap of squares out of this. It's just for demonstration. So I'm just going to make 2, and I'm just making sure the fabric goes over. Now we don't need the platform, but we do still need to make a sandwich, as it's called. Now the blade is on top on this, so you want to use your well-loved cutting mat on the top and protect the one at the bottom to just get a bit more life out of them, and make sure it is going over those blades. And then I'm just going to feed it through. Okay, and you can see, oops, just how clean and quick that is to cut a couple of squares. So I've got 4 here because I'm going to make 2 pads. I'm going to make one on the sewing machine and one on the overlocker. So you can see I've used patterned fabric here. So if you're not too confident, just use plain fabric so you don't have to worry too much about remembering to make sure that the design is the right way up. And what we're going to do, normally you would do right sides together with anything and turn it out, but we're not too worried about having the stitching on the outside. So we're not going to sew it this way, but we are going to sew it back to back, so wrong sides together. So you can see then when it's filled and when it's stitched, the pattern is all in the same direction. Now you can pin these or clip them, whatever you want to do, but they're so small and quick to do, I don't worry too much about that. I would also say, as I mentioned before, if you're not too confident sewing in a circle, you can always do a square one. It doesn't have to be completely circle. I just like the size and the shape to fit in a hand, but you can do whatever shape you like. And you can see here that I've just done a little straight stitch, and that's what we're going to do. So I've set it on the smallest setting of the stitch on your machine, because if you are going to use tiny pieces of wheat or rice, you don't want it to be too big of a stitch. So we're going to need to remember to leave a little opening to put the filler in. So if you need to put a little marker to make sure that you don't sew all the way around and forget, you could use a pin, but I just like to use these quilting clips, so I don't pierce the fabric, and they really stand out, and there's no risk of me hurting myself with a pin. Now again, if you've got one of these magnetic seam gauges, they're really good for making sure you keep the same distance in your seam all the way around. If not, you could use a bit of washi tape or painter's tape just to mark it, and that way as it's sewing through, you can keep it touching and you know you've got the same distance around. So I'm just going to stick that on, and I'm not too worried actually what my seam allowance will be. I'm just going to butt it up there and go with that. There is usually markings on your machine if you want to be specific. And again, depending on your colour of thread, whether you want it to be a contrasting stitch or whether you want it to blend in, just think about that as well before you thread up your machine. So as always, putting the foot down now, I'm not worried too much because this is a small shape. Once I start stitching, I will leave this. So this starting stitch will need to be reinforced. So once we start, we'll need to just reverse slightly over that stitch just to reinforce it. So as you know, we always start sewing with our machine, with our needle in the machine. And I'm just going to pull on these threads as well, because if you don't start sewing with those nice and tight and your needle in the highest position, that's when you can get a little bit of bobbling at the start of your sewing. So put that down, make sure your stitchings are right, and then just go nice and slow. Now I'm doing this in real time, just so you've got an idea of how fast I am going or how slow. Now I'm going to just stop there, and I'm just going to move this to make sure I give myself enough of a seam allowance here. And I'm going to leave probably a good 1.5 inches maybe, and then I'm going to continue sewing. And I'm just going to reverse that, because I actually think I forgot at the beginning to do that. Okay, so taking the needle up to the highest position, lifting up the foot pedal, and then just snipping that away. And you can see it's not exactly perfect, but if you're giving this as a gift, no one's going to be looking at it and critiquing it. If you're keeping it for yourself, if you wanted it a little bit more decorative, you can use your pinking shears just to make some nice little cuts around the outside of that as well. So this is our opening point, and this is where you can get a sieve or use a little jug, and we're going to pour whatever you want in the side. Now make sure it is heat resistant, so usually dried rice or wheat is usually a good option. I also like to put a little bit of essential oil in as well, just so that when it is warming up in the microwave, you don't get that smell that rice and wheat does get. So let's fill this up, and then we can finish sewing the rest of it. Okay, so we've got a little opening, and we don't want to overfill it because they do retain a bit of heat. So I'm just going to put some rice in a measuring jug, but as I said, if you've got a sieve, that will work just as fine. And this is the tricky part, just keeping it open, and I'm just holding it over the rice bucket itself for the spillage. Give it a little bit of shake, and you see how quickly that fills up. And we want to make sure that it's not over full, because we need to be able to stitch the rest of that. So I'm just going to remove a few of those. Yeah, and that feels good. And then I've just got my little essential oil here as well that I'm going to pop in. Just a little bit, not too much because it is pure, and we don't want to stain. This is, you could easily get a little bit of stain on here as well if you're using pure essential oils. Okay, so let's go back to the machine. Just going to put that back on, being careful to keep it pressed in, and I'm going to go over the last few stitches that we did as well. So again, putting down the presser foot, and I'm going to try and line that up and then put it in. Now last time I did forget to reverse a few stitches, even though I've got it written here. You can see I've got a terrible memory, and I'm just going to go nice and slow. I'm going to stop at this point and just move all of those rice bits inside out the way. And then I've met the end of the other, so I just need to reverse again. Lift up the presser foot, pull it out, and then snip off the threads. And this is when I'll tidy up the rest of the snips as well. But once that's in the microwave, now because of the size of it, I would say you'd only probably need a minute. Or like I say, I also keep some in the freezer, so I've got a cold one ready as well. Now I'm just going to finish that off with pink and shears so you can see how decorative it looks. Or as I said, if you wanted, you could have a smaller seam allowance. Okay, so we're going to do it on the overlocker now, and I've got my little stitch guide here. We're going to do a rolled hem on this, so that we've got a nice edge, and you can see I've done another example here for you of what it will look like, and I really like this rolled hem design. It's nice and neat and tidy. So to get that, I've got all my tensions set at 3, apart from the lower looper, which needs to be between 7 and 9, so I put it on 9. Your stitch length, your machine may have one for the rolled hem itself, but I do like it a little bit thicker. Being a beginner, it is hard to keep right on the edge of that. It's another reason why both of your circles need to be exactly the right size. So if you're not too confident, just have a bigger stitch length because it will come wider out to catch that. So again, just lifting up the presser foot. Again, we've got little lines here to guide us. This is actually a 3-thread stitch, so I've removed the left side needle from this. It's just the right hand needle that's in. Okay, so let's get stitching. So again, go very, very slowly. Make sure you've got the right colour thread that you want. This is really going to stand out on this, so which is why you really do need to be careful and go nice and slow. Now it is a little bit more tricky doing circles on an overlocker, but you can manipulate it just by stretching and pulling the fabric, and always keep your eye here. And now that I've got that a little bit out of the way, I'm going to just put my little clip in there again just to make sure I leave enough space to fill it later. And you can see the start of that thread coming along, so you can see it's a little bit thicker. Because the stitches are longer, it's not as tight, but because I'm not as confident on a circle doing a nice tight stitch, I've just made them bigger to go around. It's a great way of practicing your circles. Now because there's no reverse or back stitch on an overlocker, you just need to pull your fabric out of the way so that the chain of thread can keep going, which is what I'm going to do now. And then we can join that up again later. I'm just going to slip that, and that's what we've got so far. So because I don't have a seam allowance on this, I can get a little bit more of the rice in. Oops. So by nature it is a little bit of a bigger bag because there's no seam allowance. And then I'm just going to put a little bit more of that oil in. And then let's go back and stitch that up. Okay, so we're back at the machine now, and I'm just going to put the little clip in just to keep some of that rice in place while we start to sew. And as I said, it is really tricky, so we're going to start stitching and get the chain going on some of the stitches we've already done before we continue with the circle. I'm just going to press the foot up a little to make sure that gets close enough to the needle, and then again nice and slow with a stitch. Just moving that rice out of the way so the presser foot's got somewhere to go. Okay, and then cutting off that chain thread. These are our finished little pads, and as you can see, they're a great size for warming them up before you go out, or if you do need a cold pad as well of just putting them down. They are fiddly to make because of the size, so it is easier to do a big one. If you don't get a perfect circle around, when you're cutting with the Pinkins shears, you can just make sure then the gap is around, so it's easy to cover up any mistakes that you may have. And this is the first one I made, and you see that was far from perfect, so don't expect to be perfect on the first go. This is a beginner project, so just enjoy it and practice making your circles. So I hope you enjoyed that. See you next time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you've got any comments about this video, please leave them below. I'd love to see them. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. That way YouTube knows to recommend similar ones for you. And finally, if you'd like to see more from me, and I hope so, please subscribe by clicking the link below. I post new content every weekend.